In 2001, in the mountains of eastern China, a team of divers went down into a lake. The water was dark and deep and cold, and as they descended, it swallowed the light behind them, the surface receding into a green-black ceiling above their heads. They were not searching for treasure. They were not chasing a legend. They were simply going down to see what was left of a place that people had told them was down there. A place that, within living memory, had stood in the sunlight, and that had been deliberately, knowingly drowned. They dropped down through the dark, 10 meters, 20, 30, and then, out of the blue-black water in front of them, something appeared. A wall, not rubble, not a shapeless ruin, a wall, stonework, laid by human hands, standing upright on the bottom of the lake, and beyond it, as they moved forward through the silence, more. An archway, a gate, a monumental gate carved with figures, dragons, lions, phoenixes, the great symbols of imperial China, cut into the stone by craftsmen who had been dead for centuries, and here they were, still perfectly sharp, still gazing out into the water. Behind the gate, streets, stone stairways climbing to doorways, buildings with their roof beams, wooden beams, still in place, still holding, standing in the darkness exactly as they had been left. An entire city, whole and intact, resting in silence at the bottom of a lake. It is called Shicheng, the Lion City. And tonight we are going to descend into it. We are going to look at what it was, and at the astonishing thing that was done to it, and at the strange, sad, beautiful accident of preservation that has kept it perfect in the dark. Because Shicheng is not a lost city in the way we usually mean. Nobody was searching for it. Nobody had misplaced it. Everybody knew exactly where it was. The people who drowned it are, some of them, still alive. What makes Shicheng extraordinary is not that it was lost, it is that it was sacrificed, on purpose, in the full knowledge of what was being destroyed, and then simply forgotten, and that the water, which was supposed to be its erasure, turned out instead to be the most perfect preservation anyone could have devised. Nefrensbild in Ristian, Meningsbild in Essenchums, Meningsbild, Nuffenwani, Venomdartachum province, in eastern China, and it was old. Its origins reach back roughly 1,800 years, to the era of the Eastern Han, a founding so distant that it happened while the Roman Empire still ruled the Mediterranean. It took its name, the Lion City, from a mountain that stood behind it. And it endured, and it grew, through dynasty after dynasty, century after century, as the whole vast story of imperial China unfolded around it. It was rebuilt and expanded, especially in the great eras that followed, its walls raised, its gates carved, its temples and halls and homes and stairways layered one atop the next by generation after generation of people who lived and worked and raised children and died in that valley. By the time the 20th century arrived, Shicheng was a walled town of considerable beauty and real antiquity, with 5 monumental gates set into its walls, where most Chinese cities of the type had 4. Its gateways and archways were richly carved, dragons and phoenixes, lions and stone inscriptions, the ornamental vocabulary of imperial China rendered in the local stone. There were memorial arches within the town, raised to honor virtue and achievement, some of them centuries old. There were the ordinary streets and stairways and houses of a place where people had simply lived for 1,800 years in a valley among mountains. And it is worth pausing on what that means, because it is easy to skim past. 1,800 years. When the first walls of Shicheng were raised, the Roman legions were still marching. The city was already ancient when the great dynasties of the Chinese Golden Ages rose and fell. It stood through wars and famines and the rebuilding of the country a dozen times over. Generation after generation was born inside those walls, walked through those gates, climbed those stairways, and was buried in the ground of that valley, an unbroken thread of human life, in one place, running from the deep past all the way to the middle of the 20th century. The stone lions on the gate had watched something like 60 generations of people come and go beneath them. That is the thing that was in the valley when the decision was made. Not a monument, a living continuity, 18 centuries long. And then, in the middle of the 20th century, the modern world arrived, and it needed something the valley could give it. Bukbeo Confades. China in the 1950s was a country determined to build. Electricity, industry, development, the future was to be constructed, quickly and at scale, and the great rivers of the country were among the most powerful tools available. And so it was decided that a hydroelectric station would be built in this region, that a dam would be raised, and that in order to feed that dam, the valley would be flooded. A reservoir would be created. The water would rise, and it would cover everything that stood in that valley: the fields, the villages, the farms, the temples, the towns, including Shicheng. The decision was made, the dam was built, and in 1959, the water came. Now, I want to slow down here, because it is very easy to say the valley was flooded and move on, and to miss the human weight of what that sentence contains. This was not an accident. This was not a natural disaster. This was a choice, carried out deliberately by human beings who knew exactly what they were doing, and the scale of what it cost is staggering. Something on the order of 300,000 people had to be moved. Nearly 300,000 human beings, families, elders, children, entire communities, were relocated out of that valley so that the water could take it. They left their homes, they left their fields, the land their families had worked for generations. They left their ancestral halls, the temples where their family lines were honored, the graves of their dead. Imagine being told that the town your family has lived in for centuries, the streets your grandparents walked, the house you were born in, is going to be at the bottom of a lake, and that you have to be out by a certain date. Imagine walking out through one of those carved gates for the last time, knowing that the water was coming, that the gate itself would soon be underwater, that everything you had ever known would be submerged and out of reach forever. Think about what a person takes with them in that situation, and what they must leave. You can carry clothes. You can carry a few tools, some photographs, a cooking pot, the things that fit in a cart. You cannot carry a house. You cannot carry a street. You cannot carry the tree in the courtyard, or the well the family has drawn from for 200 years, or the temple where every generation of your line has been remembered by name. You cannot carry the graves. That, more than anything, is the wound that does not heal in a story like this. That in a culture where the veneration of ancestors is woven into the fabric of life, hundreds of thousands of people had to walk away and leave their dead beneath the rising water, in ground they would never be able to visit again, never sweep, never tend. Whole family histories anchored for centuries to a specific patch of earth in a specific valley were simply cut loose. That is what happened to the people of the Lion City, and to the people of the other towns and villages of that valley, and to hundreds of thousands of others. They went. They had no choice, and the water rose. It rose over the fields. It rose over the roads and the farmhouses. It climbed the walls of Shicheng and covered its 5 great gates, and closed over its carved arches and its stairways and its rooftops, and it kept rising until the whole city, every wall, every street, every dragon and phoenix carved into every archway, was gone, deep beneath a new lake that had never existed before. The reservoir they created is enormous and beautiful, and today it is a well-known scenic area, dotted with more than 1,000 islands, the tops of the old mountains and hills of the drowned valley now standing out of the water as an archipelago. It is called the 1,000-Island Lake. People go there to enjoy the water and the views. It looks like nature. It is not. Every one of those islands is a mountaintop, and the water between them is filling a valley where hundreds of thousands of people used to live, and where an 1,800-year-old city still stands, 40 meters down in the dark. And here is what I find hardest to shake about this story. For roughly 40 years, 4 decades, almost nobody thought about it. The city was not lost. It was not forgotten in the sense that its location was a mystery. It was simply out of sight, and out of sight became out of mind. The people who had been moved got on with their lives, in new towns, in new homes, carrying their memories privately. The country got on with its enormous, urgent business of building itself. The lake became a lake. The tourists came. The islands were pretty. And beneath the boats and the swimmers and the pleasant views, an entire imperial city sat in the darkness, whole, untouched, its gates still carved, its beams still standing, holding its silence, while the world above went about its business and gradually stopped remembering that it was there at all. Until, in the early years of this century, someone thought to go and look. The dive that opened this story again took place in 2001, when a team went down to see what had actually happened to Shicheng after 4 decades underwater, and their expectation, the reasonable expectation, the one any of us would have had, was that they would find not much. Rubble, maybe, collapsed and rotted structures. The vague suggestion of a town dissolved by 4 decades of water into a formless mess on the bottom. What they found instead was almost unbelievable. Nanchu Wensan. The city was intact. Not partially intact, not recognizable in outline. Intact. The walls stood. The gates stood, their carvings crisp and clear, the dragons and lions and phoenixes still legible in the stone, as though they had been cut recently. The stone stairways were there, climbing between levels of the town. The memorial arches were still standing, upright, exactly as they had been. And most astonishing of all, the wooden beams of the houses were still in place, wood, timber, still holding, still intact, after 40 years underwater. The city had not decayed. It had been preserved, almost perfectly, in a state that its own streets could not have maintained if the water had never come at all. Consider what it must be like to swim through it. You descend through water that grows darker and colder with every meter, until the surface is a distant memory and your torch is the only light in the world. And then the beam finds a wall. You follow it, and it becomes a gate, a monumental gate, taller than a house, and as you drift up toward the arch of it, the carvings resolve out of the gloom. A lion's face, worn smooth in places by nothing at all, because nothing down here wears anything. A dragon coiled along a lintel, a phoenix in flight, frozen in stone. You pass through the gateway, through a gate that people walk through on ordinary mornings, carrying baskets, going to market, coming home, and on the other side there are streets, silt on the paving, stairways going up into the dark, doorways standing open onto rooms where families ate their dinners. And everywhere, absolute silence and absolute stillness, and the strange dim green-black light of deep fresh water, and the knowledge that everything you are touching was standing in the sun, in a living town, within the lifetime of people who are alive today. It is not like exploring a ruin. It is like walking into a photograph. Momot einstadded, and this is the great, strange, ironic heart of the story. So let us understand exactly why it happened. What destroys old buildings is not usually time in the abstract. It is the world. It is sunlight breaking down materials year after year. It is wind and rain and frost wearing at stone and prying at joints, and the freeze and thaw of the seasons cracking things apart. It is the acidity of rain and the salt in coastal air and the growth of plants pushing roots into cracks. And above all, it is people, the endless human process of rebuilding, repurposing, demolishing, modernizing, in which old walls become new foundations and ancient carvings become rubble for a road. Take all of that away, and what happens? The water of that lake is fresh, not salt. So the corrosive chemistry of the sea, which eats away at everything, does not apply. It is deep, so the city sits far below the reach of the sun and of the churning surface. There is no wind down there. There is no rain. There is no frost, no freeze-thaw cycle, no seasonal battering. There are no crowds, no builders, no developers, no one to demolish anything to make room for something new. The temperature is stable. The city is held in a cold, dark, still, unchanging medium, protected from every single force that would have worn it away up in the air. The water, in other words, did not destroy Shicheng. The water saved it. Think of what would have happened if the valley had never been flooded. The Lion City would have gone on being an ordinary living town in a developing country in the second half of the 20th century. It would have been modernized. Old buildings would have come down. New ones would have gone up. The carvings would have weathered under the rain and the sun for another 60-odd years. Some of it would have been preserved, perhaps, and some of it lost, and much of it changed beyond recognition, as happens to virtually every old town everywhere on Earth. The Shicheng of the past would have slowly, ordinarily been eaten by the present. Instead, it was drowned, and in drowning, it was frozen. The lake sealed the city at a moment in time and held it there. What the divers found in 2001 was not a ruin. It was a snapshot. A whole imperial Chinese town, with its walls and its gates and its carvings and its wooden beams, preserved as it stood at the very instant the water closed over it, unchanged and unchanging in the deep. The act meant to erase it turned out to be the act that saved it. That is the paradox that makes Shicheng, to me, one of the most haunting places in the world. It exists because it was destroyed. It survives because it was drowned. Its perfection is a direct consequence of its tragedy. And it is a tragedy that should not be softened. Because behind the beauty of the sunken carvings and the drama of the intact beams, there is the plain fact of what was done and what it cost. 300,000 people were displaced. Homes were abandoned. Ancestral shrines were left to the water. Communities that had existed for centuries in that valley were dissolved and scattered. Whole family histories, rooted in specific streets and specific houses and specific graves, were cut loose from the ground they had grown in. The people who left the valley in 1959 did not lose a monument. They lost a home. And they lost it not to fate, not to a flood, but to a decision, made in the name of progress, of electricity, of the future, and made by people who would not have to live with the consequences of it in the same way. Many of those people, or their children, are alive today. There are people walking around right now who remember the Lion City above water, who played in those streets, who walked through those carved gates on ordinary days without giving them a second thought, and who now know that everything from their childhood is sitting 40 meters down in a lake, perfectly preserved, close enough to reach by boat and completely, permanently out of reach forever. That is a strange kind of grief, not the grief of loss exactly, because the thing is not gone. It is right there, it is intact, it is simply underwater, and it might as well be on another planet. Since the rediscovery, Shicheng has become something of a legend, sometimes called an Atlantis of the East, and divers have gone down to explore and photograph it. The images that have come back are extraordinary. Stone lions emerging out of green darkness, archways standing in silt, carved dragons that have not seen the sun since 1959, still coiled in the stone, waiting. There have been discussions over the years about what to do with it, whether to protect it, whether to develop access to it, whether it should be seen at all. Diving there is not simple. The city lies deep, in cold, dark water, and it is fragile in ways that are easy to underestimate. The very thing that has preserved it, total isolation from the world above, is also what makes contact with it dangerous, for the city and for the people who visit it. And so it sits there in the dark, doing what it has done for more than 60 years now, nothing at all, not decaying, not changing, not growing, just existing perfectly at the bottom of a lake, while the boats pass overhead and the tourists photograph the pretty islands that are really the peaks of the mountains that surrounded it. There is one more thought I keep returning to, and it is the one that stays with me longest. Shicheng is not unique. That is the part that unsettles. All over the world, in the great age of dam building, valleys were flooded, and towns were drowned, and people were moved, and it happened over and over again, in many countries on many rivers. There are drowned villages beneath reservoirs in Europe, in the Americas, across Asia. Some of them surface briefly in times of drought, when the water drops and old church towers and bridges and street plans emerge, dripping, into the sun for a few weeks, and people come to stand in the streets of their grandparents' villages before the water takes them back. This is a thing our species does. When we need power, or water, or progress, we drown places. We move the living, and we leave the rest, and we do not look back. And the water patiently keeps everything we abandon. The Lion City has been down there since 1959, holding its gates and its dragons and its stairways in the cold dark, unchanged since the day the valley filled. It is a city that no one lost and no one forgot exactly, and yet somehow everyone stopped thinking about, until divers went down into the black water in 2001 and found the past standing there, perfectly intact, exactly where we left it. The lake has kept it far better than we ever would have. That is not a comfort. That is an accusation of a very quiet kind. We drowned an 1,800-year-old city, and the drowning preserved it. And the only reason we can see what we destroyed is that we destroyed it so completely that nothing else could get at it. The water is dark, and the city is silent, and the carved lions are still watching from the gates, 40 meters down, in a place we made and then chose not to remember. And they will go on watching, unchanged, long after everyone who ever walked through those gates in the sunlight is gone. A whole world held perfectly still beneath a pretty lake, waiting in the cold for nothing at all.